Here we are. We're on the air, and so that'll do for a gavel. Welcome, everyone. I'm calling the July 22nd, 2020 Planning Commission meeting to order. This is a special meeting held in lieu of the July 15th meeting, which was canceled due to the tragic events earlier in the week. The packet used for this meeting is the packet that we had for the July 15th meeting, and additional comments submitted by the public are also included in the packet. The main purpose of tonight's meeting is to hold public hearings on the Canyon Park Subarea Plan Update and the limited parking reductions and height allowances code amendments. After hearing public comment on Canyon Park, we will continue the hearing until 22nd. As we do have some public comments on Canyon Park and no staff presentation, I propose we hear that one first unless there are any objections. So, not seeing any. Just a few ground rules before we move on to the agenda items. I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. Governor's Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings was again extended. Therefore, this meeting will be held entirely remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. The video of this meeting will be streamed live as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. Call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which meetings they are referencing so everyone can follow along. Those who provided advance notice will be able to make comments under the audience comment portion of the meeting. Those who want to make comments during the public hearing, I'd ask that you hold those comments for the public hearing until we open it. Email was encouraged and will be acknowledged as well. Yes. I'd ask commissioners, are you getting an echo in me speaking?
No echo with you. Mike's microphone was off when he was speaking.
Oh. It might be just you hearing me live and hearing me over the internet. So at this point, oh, it's a delay? Okay. I'm going to pause for a minute while we do a technical check here.
This is Commissioner Aldrich's here. I can't hear Mike when he's speaking. He was muted.
Sorry, I was talking with the chair, and I forgot that I was muted for the rest of you. My apologies.
It is an adjustment.
See, I just heard for the second time what Commissioner Aldrich said. If I'm the only one hearing it, I'll bear through it. So let's go ahead and continue.
Okay. So at this point, we'll resume. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge that all the planning commissioners are present and participating in the meeting remotely. In addition, the following city staff are in attendance: Community Development Director Mike Cowderman and Senior Planner Dave Boyd. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines. I hope we're all getting used to these, but still. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. Also, if you're streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there's a delay, and that can confuse you. For the commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I'll be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, I'll ask you to indicate this by holding up the yellow cards in the lower portion of your screen. I'll also look to see if you're waving at me, trying to get my attention. This will help avoid the problem of two people speaking at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in a debate. and please mute your microphone when not speaking. So with that, we'll launch into the agenda. First item on the agenda is public comments, and again, I'll ask that you hold any comments on Canyon Park or the height adjustments public hearing. In keeping with the governor's emergency proclamation regarding gatherings and public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing, as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to the staff no later than 3 p.m. were forwarded to the commissioners and are part of the agenda. And Director Cotterman will let us know, have we received any comments other than our hearing matters?
The only comments that we received, Mr. Chair, were regarding the hearing items this evening. So we have no other comments. And I fixed my audio problem.
Okay, good, thank you. Good for you.
Yes.
All right, so hearing none, we're going to move on to the agenda as normal. We do not have any minutes for approval at this meeting. So new business, I'll ask, do we have any new business at this time?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on to the public hearings. I am going to move with the Canyon Park public hearing first, because we do have some folks who wish to speak to this, and there's no staff presentation that'll precede that. So with that, I open the public hearing on the Canyon Park sub-area plan update.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a continuation of the public hearing that was opened on July 8th. We do have 3 speakers that have requested the opportunity to speak to the commission this evening. There will be each allowed 3 minutes to speak to you. And I believe at least 2 of them have also submitted written comments that were forwarded to the commission when those were received yesterday and today, as I recall, for those 2. I would also just note, for the benefit of the commission, because we canceled last week's meeting and moved it to this week, we made a decision to focus this meeting on the other item that is up for public hearing this evening, because it is more time critical at this point. And that will allow us additional time to work on the rest of the packet, the regulations specifically for the Canyon Park sub area. So our plan is to bring a complete package to you at that September 2nd meeting. We had been pushing to get as much done as we could for a couple of reasons. One, because Mr. Blackburn was going to be retiring at the end of this month, and he is officially on vacation, but more or less retired. So we really wanted to get this completed, if possible, before he left the city. He's gotten it to a really great point. We have a little bit more work to do, so we will continue on without him, but we need a little extra time to try to get the rest of that package together. The other reason for the big push was because of the state funding that we had to work on the completion of the plan. We had certain deliverables that we had to provide to the State Department of Commerce by the end of June in order to receive all of the funding from the state that was set aside for the city by the legislature. So we were able to create the draft documents that met those requirements and submitted those to the state on time. And that's one reason that we have been also bringing a lot of materials to the commission and trying to get to a conclusion sooner rather than later. We also have projects that will be coming into, we anticipate being submitted to the city later this year. For example, the Sound Transit bus base, and we wanted to have the plan and the regulations in place prior to that application and other applications that have expressed interest in development in the sub area. So for all of those reasons, we're really pushing hard to get everything done by the end of this month. Obviously, we have not made that, but we're getting closer, and we thought that it was better to spend this evening focused on the other item that has the more time-critical deadline now, and then spend more time preparing the rest of the package for you, that we can come back and have the rest of the discussion, the public hearing, and hopefully get to a recommendation with the Planning Commission on Canyon Park in September, and then go to the City Council in October. So that's just to give you a quick update as to where we are, how we got here, why we got here, and where we're going from here. So with that, that's all I had as far as the presentation this evening. We have no other presentation for the commission. And with that, I will call on our first speaker, Molly Lawrence. So Molly, if you could identify yourself, and we will let you know when you're at 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mike and Mr. Catterman. I am Molly Lawrence. I am a land use attorney here in Washington. I represent the Canyon Park Business Center Owners Association. And I will admit I have actually represented the Owners Association for nearly 20 years now. So I have been around the park and around the sub area for a very long time with a great deal of familiarity about what has and has not worked. The Owners Association represents the owners of the property in the Canyon Park Business Center. It's approximately 360 acres of land in the center. And the Canyon Park Business Center makes up 65% of the proposed regional growth center boundaries and more than half of the sub area. I submitted earlier today a letter that expressed the owners' concerns and frustration with the sub area plan process and proposal as it exists to date. The sub-area plan lists the extensive outreach that the city has undertaken over the last 3 years while developing the plan. And we don't contest that there have been many meetings and many requests for meetings. What the plan doesn't fairly or thoroughly reflect is the concerns raised during the course of that public outreach or how the city plans to address the myriad concerns that have been raised. For more than a year, the Owners Association asked the city to look at the transportation impacts in the park inside Canyon Park from the proposed sub-area plan. The city declined to do that for quite some time until recently, and about 2 weeks ago, I believe, thereabouts, we did finally get a transportation analysis. And that transportation analysis, unfortunately, shows us what we already knew. It's that the roads in and around Canyon Park are not adequate to accommodate the additional density that the sub-area plan is attempting to impose on the park. The roads simply fail. They said they are nearly failing now, not in the park, but around the park, when they are failing around the park, and that's causing all sorts of congestion in the park. But with the planned development, even with the proposed additional improvements, the system is effectively going to fail. And that is not really acceptable to the owners. They don't see the trade-off that I think others seem to be articulating in favor of additional development in exchange for more congestion. And in fact, your plan doesn't support it either. The market analysis that's with the plan, which is another piece that we had looked for and asked for, shows that there is no market for redevelopment in the park. And I guess I'd say that's something we've also known. The Owners Association has known for a long time. More than 10 years ago, when Bill Weislogle was the planning director, the city first asked the park whether or not we would accept the designation or the additional zoning necessary to create the regional growth center. And before that, the city had tried to increase the density in the park by through another zoning amendment that allowed increased density and increased height. And since that time, with both of those amendments, more than a decade worth of effort, there's been one new commercial building constructed in the park. So, and the market analysis that you all have as part of this plan shows that the only viable type of redevelopment at this point is residential or mixed-use residential. Well,
yeah, let's wrap it up. You're getting near your 3-minute time.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. You'll know, right, that the park doesn't permit residential in most of the area. We recently, about 2 years ago, allowed residential in the park in concert with the city when we thought we were working with them to try to move towards transferring the roads to the city. And it was important to the Owners Association that the roads be transferred before any residential came into the park because we wanted to ensure police presence. My letter outlines those efforts have fallen apart of late, and we do not have a plan for the transfer of the roads to the park. I'll wrap up by saying we have requested a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, a joint study session, so you could hear directly from the Owners Association members and the board about their concerns. We really do. I mean, I would say we have stressed again and again, we are very eager to work with you. We have worked with the city for years on various things. We've just been surprised to see this sub-area plan continue to come at us without our significant concerns really being adequately addressed. And we understand there's more detail to come and plan to submit additional comments as this process continues, but thank you very much.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Mark Cummings with Life Science Washington. Mark, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, hello. Mark Cummings, Vice President of Public Policy, Life Science Washington. We are the largest trade association representing life science companies here in Washington. Back in March, we worked with the city to organize a charrette with life science companies in and around the Kenyon Park area to review the sub-area plan. And I just wanted to thank the city for taking time to put that meeting together. It was quite helpful. You should know that the life science cluster in Bothell Kenyon Park is very special. According to our latest economic impact report, there are over 60 companies in Bothell proper. And if you go just a few miles in any direction beyond the city proper, that expands to several hundred companies, quite literally. The average wage for most life science companies in the state is well over $100,000. But the Kenyon Park Life Science Cluster offers a range of jobs from entry-level manufacturing that require a high school degree to office-based management, clinical trial management jobs, to highly specialized lab-based research jobs. And I should point out the life science sector, like healthcare, tends to be countercyclical, and that's certainly true now as our members are working furiously on COVID response to the pandemic. And so it's a great industry to have in the community. We'd like to applaud the city and the commission for their work to preserve and strategically grow the Kenyon Park Life Science Cluster. It takes years for life science companies to do the research necessary to bring new products to market, and they need specialized facilities and lab space. Today, lab space is very hard to come by, and lab space that is affordable for startup companies is virtually non-existent. So we were pleased to see the recommendation to limit residential development in the southeast corner of the sub-area. That will help ensure that critical specialized facilities that can take some time to plan and build aren't crowded out by other development. It was also exciting to see the proposal to brand the area as a life science hub. That's important because so many people in the area are unaware of the companies and incredible job opportunities that exist right in their backyard. Finally, a couple thoughts for you to consider as you finalize the plan. Quality of life is a critical factor for our companies in recruiting and retaining employees. And today, employees increasingly want to be in a vibrant, walkable neighborhood with amenities and access to transit options rather than a 1980s-style suburban business park. So in addition to preserving the industrial area for that purpose and branding the area life science cluster, we'd encourage you to consider finding ways to locate amenities deeper into the business park so that people can walk rather than drive for food, restaurants, meetings, and collaboration space. Likewise, providing ways to ensure that people can get from 405 to their office without the use of a car. For example, circulating shuttles, scooters, those kind of options. We also think it would be helpful to increase the height limits in the business park area because there's very little room for companies to grow today. Raising the height limits in the industrial area would both target density there as well as incentivize development of highly specialized laboratory and manufacturing facilities. Finally, I heard the discussion at the last meeting about having some more affordable space for startups. Affordable lab space for startups is a huge challenge for young companies. I don't have a recommendation on that, but we are happy to work with you to think through options to help facilitate that. Finally, I haven't had time to go through all the details of the plan, but we will commit to work with that same group of companies that we convened back in March to get their input and then consolidate and compile recommendations to you. Yep, I'm finished.
You're finished? All right, thank you for your comments. Any other? I think you were muted.
You would think by now I would know how to do this. Sorry, our third speaker this evening is Ann Agard. Ann, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, commissioners. My name is Ann Agard. I live in Bothell, and I am here to comment on your Kenyon Park draft sub-area plan. I sent comments to you on the 21st of July, so I will just summarize 3 of these for your public hearing tonight. First, on page 102 of the draft sub-area plan, the preferred option is to build the vehicular access between 9th Avenue Southeast and the Bothell Everett Highway. That is the extension of 214th Southeast. I strongly oppose this option, and the speaker for the Business Park Association, Molly Lawrence, gave you a good reason as to why you should not do this. Even with this road put in, this transportation system is going to fail. But even worse was that putting this road in is a significant and very negative impact to a area in the city of Bothell. Not only is this a Class 1 wetland, but it is a natural area, that natural designation of North Creek in the Bothell Shoreline Master Program. And that natural designation and the Class 1 wetland extends on both the north and the south of 214th. And the North Creek currently has a 150-foot buffer for the natural designation under the Bothell Shoreline Master Program, and bridges, roads, bikes, and pedestrian paths require conditional use permits under the Bothell Shoreline Master Program. And the uses are very limited. So it would be very difficult to get this road permitted. It would have significant negative impacts, but I do support looking into putting a bike and pedestrian path to the south, on the south side of 214. My second comment has to do with the buffer enhancement on page 60. And this is where there's discussion about buffers and wetlands, buffers for wetlands and streams would be implemented consistent with the planned action ordinance, the city codes, etc., and that design sensitive to the site must be employed. However, there are no particulars, no information at all about what this involves or how it would be implemented. But there are currently codes in the Bothell Shoreline Master Program, as I outlined in my letter, 1315.050 and 1313.010, that already tell you what can be done with non-conforming uses.
Okay,
So
you're at your 3-minute limit, so if you could please wrap up, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so please do not include this section in the document. My third comment has to do with page 91, the wetland and riparian mitigation restoration projects. And I concur with the earlier discussion that the Planning Commission had regarding focusing mitigation, compensatory mitigation on site, and the current code calls for this to be within the subbasin. But in addition, I would refer you to the January 13, 2020 comment letter from Karen Walters from the Muckleshoot Indian Tribe. If you do not, it is a reply, their comment letter to the draft environmental impact statement. And if you do not have this, please request it from the staff.
Okay, you are at 4 minutes now, so please wrap up. Thank you.
I am summarizing my comments so that
we have received the letter. That is part of the record. Thank you.
She also emphasizes the importance of doing on-site compensatory mitigation. Thank you for consideration of these issues.
Thank you. And do we have any other? I didn't hear you on that, other than over the air.
Those are the only speakers that I have this evening, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. So with that, I will ask for a motion to continue this hearing until our September 2nd or September 3rd? Until our September 2nd meeting. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Curd.
This is Karsten Curd. I move that we continue the public hearing on the Canyon Park draft sub-area plan till our next meeting on September 3rd, 2020. Second, 2020.
Yeah. Thank you. Do we have a second? Commissioner Olson.
I second Commissioner Curd's motion.
All right. The motion being proposed and seconded to continue the hearing to our September 2nd meeting. Would all in favor please indicate by, I guess, waving your hand. I see all commissioners in favor. Therefore, there are none opposed. So with that, we will continue this public hearing. Does that meet our needs, Director Cotterman? Okay. So with that, we will move on to the second item we have a public hearing for. And on this one, we do have a staff presentation. So I will turn this over at this point to Senior Planner Dave Boyd.
Thank you and good evening. I am going to, I'm going to share my screen. Okay.
Dave, while you're doing that, I'll just quickly introduce Mike Stanger. Commissioners may see him on the video as well. Mike is with the Regional Coalition for Housing staff and has worked with the city on many housing issues. So we're very pleased to have Mike with us this evening. Thanks, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to do that and also mention that he has been working with the team on the affordable housing aspects of the Canyon Park plan and regulations as well. So tonight we're opening a public hearing on the what I have, I'm suggesting a name change and calling it the Limited Parking Reductions and Affordable Housing Incentive Code Amendments. Height allowances was a little generic. I think that the real purpose of these height allowances is to create an incentive for affordable housing. So that's my proposal here at the beginning of this meeting, so that as the recommendation goes forward to City Council, if the Planning Commission concurs, we'll move forward with this title. Okay, I may have skipped one here. Background. First of all, there are some state regulations that are requiring us to look at the parking reductions. In the last 2 years, the state legislature has passed and then revised regulations limiting parking minimums within a quarter mile of frequent transit stops. And I'll get into that a little more in detail later. The Bothell housing strategy also identifies parking reductions as one tool to help create or incentivize affordable housing. The affordable housing incentives, the Downtown Planned Action Environmental Impact Statement had a height analysis that was based on the originally proposed heights. And in the SR 522 corridor, those were 4 stories and 54 feet. That has provided, it was similar in other zones, and that has provided us the opportunity to increase the heights without doing a further environmental study of the aesthetic impacts. The Bothell housing strategy also indicates that height bonuses are one tool that can be used to incentivize affordable housing. So those are the bases for these 2 code amendments. They were initiated in the 2020 docket in part to facilitate the development of Block A, which is one of the city's surplus properties that is currently under contract to Imagine Housing. They are proposing a 76-unit low and very low income senior housing project with approximately 38 parking spaces. They're in the early stages. They haven't actually submitted for permits yet. So they're still refining their design and also their funding through grant applications. The limited parking reductions, as I said, the state law now has 3 different cases, and they each have slightly different definitions or requirements for what constitute frequent transit. One is focused on low and very low income housing. Another is focused on senior and disabled housing. And a third one that was added this year is focused on market rate housing. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail, and I'll explain how we're addressing those in the code changes. The basic strategy that we discussed in the study session is rather than trying to zone these different uses and where they can happen, where they currently are within those radiuses of frequent transit, the strategy is to allow parking reductions as an exception for housing projects, and to make it the applicant's responsibility to request those exceptions and provide the justification, the analysis that shows that they fit those state requirements. The code already has some transit reductions that don't meet the new state standards. We propose leaving those as they are because they apply in a broader area than these ones will, and could still be of use to developers. The state allows the reductions to at least 1 space per bedroom or to 0.75 spaces per unit, and are in our code in the proposed amendments. I'm proposing that we essentially use those state thresholds and allow a development to apply for a reduction to at least to the 1 space per bedroom. And some of the areas that have frequent transit service are already zoned for that. But through the parking study to make justification to go as low as 0.75 spaces per unit with a parking study. I wanted to point out, I mentioned Imagine Housing, and I forwarded to the Planning Commission today a email with comments from them about another standard for the radius, the area of service for transit centers that's being done by Puget Sound Regional Council. And here is an excerpt from the attachment, the map that was attached to that email that was forwarded to the commission, showing a 10-minute walk or half-mile radius around Bothell Transit Center. I just received this information this afternoon, haven't had a chance to really pour into it, and it appears that they are locating the Bothell Transit Center at approximately at City Hall, which was at one point the proposed transit center. That's evolving as Sound Transit makes their plans, but this just gives one other graphic depiction of the service area for frequent transit. The map on this slide is the one that was presented at the study session. This shows quarter-mile radii around the bus stops that meet the 2019 state definition for frequent transit, which was at least 4 stops per hour for 12 continuous hours per day. As you can see there, it covers most of downtown and extends along 522 to the west, and it also covers a fair amount of Canyon Park and Thrasher's Corner as a result of the Swift line. So we are proposing to add the new parking exceptions to the existing ones. They would apply citywide, and they would evolve as transit service evolves. For senior housing, the state says that for the housing units themselves, jurisdictions can't establish a minimum. They can only establish parking minimums for staff and guests. So we're proposing a base level to cover staff and guests and allow such developments to provide studies justifying going down to that base level. And part of that study needs to take into account the availability of on-street parking in the immediate vicinity. And there was some discussion last time about whether we should use a 1/4 mile walking distance or walk shed or a 1/4 mile radius. And the staff recommendation is to go with a 1/4 mile radius just for simplicity and for a slightly broader extent. So moving on to the affordable housing incentive. As I said, the Plant Action Environmental Impact Statement for downtown studied development of 54 feet in height in the 522 corridor, as well as downtown transition and general downtown corridor districts. It also set thresholds for capacity. So this gives us the opportunity to consider height increases up to that height in feet. And given that the thresholds for development are controlled separately, we really need to, as far as the environmental review, are relying on that aesthetic review that looked at the height in feet. This provides an opportunity for voluntary affordable housing incentive and the important thing about an incentive, as opposed to the requirements that we've instituted on the west side of 522, south of the downtown core, and in the downtown transition district flanking West Hill, is those requirements are really limited since they rely on the market to provide a percentage of affordable units. They're really limited to moderately low income housing. And in our case, we set those at 60% of the area median income for rentals and 80% for ownership. To get at the lower affordability levels, you really need to get into subsidized housing, either through land donations, grants, or a combination of those. So these voluntary incentives are an opportunity to actually get at those lower income levels, which is important in terms of really creating an equitable downtown sub-area that has a range of housing serving all income levels. The current proposals we discussed in the study session is to apply this just to the SR 522 district areas that without the affordable housing overlay. This could be expanded later to include layering incentives on top of the requirements in the affordable housing overlay, or to extend to other districts. But for both of those would have required more analysis than we had the capacity to do in this time frame. And we really are focused on getting some amendments in place by September so that Imagine Housing can count on those in their grant applications to move forward on this project. So the proposal applies to all units in the structure that is applying for them. And we chose to go with that because this type of bonus, the way it's structured, is really likely only to be used by affordable housing developers that are building all affordable units in their developments. So it really is focused towards projects like the Imagine Housing project. The affordability levels, there was some discussion of this at the study session. And we've set those to match the state funding guidelines for grants, affordable housing grants. And and we've established a 50% of area median income as an average to allow developers some flexibility to provide some lower income level housing mixed with more moderate affordable housing, which is what Imagine Bothell is proposing to do. So with that, I would open it up for questions on the presentation from the commission. I also wanted to note that I already mentioned the comment letter from Imagine Housing. That was the second one I got, so that is Exhibit 2 that I forwarded to you. And earlier in the afternoon, I got a comment letter from Carrie Westerbeck. That is entering that into the record as Exhibit 1. And I have both of those available if Commission would like me to put those up on the screen. So the next steps are to open the public hearing, take any testimony, and then enter into deliberations. If the Commission is ready, we've tried to bring a packet here that's ready for recommendation to Council, and has any amendments that the Commission desires to make. If you're not ready to act tonight, then you would need to continue the public hearing to August 5th, as we had discussed at the study session, and give direction to staff on what additional work is needed. The plan, this timeline is focused on taking it to Council for adoption on September 1st. So with that, I'm going to exit out of my PowerPoint. Stop sharing for now. Oh, any questions from Commission?
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Sarah Gustafson here. This looks very good, and I really want to appreciate Mr. Stanger coming to speak with us. I wanted to ask Mr. Stanger, is this 50% average for the affordable housing incentive something that you think will strike the best balance between providing deep affordability on one end and actually making an incentive program that people will want to develop? Is this skewed towards one way or the other? Or is this the right balance? Thank you.
Well, it's usually when I look at these things, in my own work, it's related.
Could you identify yourself first, please, for the record? Thanks.
I'm sorry. Mike Stanger, planner at Regional Coalition for Housing. So my own work is focused on incentives in for-profit development projects. And if this were a for-profit project, I haven't done that kind of analysis, but if it were, I would venture to guess that this would be a very good balance for the city. But it's of course a nonprofit project, and so we're talking about public investment versus the give and take between a private for-profit developer. So it's a different matter, and I may have to, if we go in depth in that side of things, then I may have to ask to confer with my colleague who does more of that work. But I did review this this proposal with Dave Boyd, and it seems very reasonable to me. It's basically giving what or making allowances for what the developer wants to do and needs to make their project feasible, and doing something that's within the parameters of what the city had already studied and found to be acceptable. So I would agree that that it's seems to be a good arrangement for both sides.
I'd like to add that in our exchange about these affordability levels, we did you did loop Klaus Nyhus in at one point who I believe felt that this was a good balance point.
Yes, he is working on that side of the project as well.
And I believe, and I apologize if you were talking about this when I was turning the lights back on, but I think, Dave, you also, as I recall, you had a discussion with the applicant at Imagine Housing about the numbers to make sure that they felt it was workable from a nonprofit standpoint. I believe they concurred with that. Is that correct?
That's correct. And in fact, they provided the state guidelines, which give different point values, the grant guidelines that give different point values for different affordability levels, and they're targeting the affordability levels that give them the highest point values, which are based on where the highest need is, and that does average to 50%. They're actually getting, they're applying for grants from two sources, one of which favors a mix of very low, extremely low, and what they call workforce housing, which has different definitions, but in that 50% range. And then the other one, well, actually the other grant program targets workforce housing, which is in that 50% average.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners like to speak or ask a question? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, Chair. This is Karsten Curd. Thanks for the presentation, Dave. I'm reflecting back on Exhibit 2, the public comment from Imagine Housing. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about an increase in the distance criteria to half-mile radius instead. I'm wondering if many other jurisdictions use that criteria, as well as it being specified for transit-oriented development in the Puget Sound Regional Council's definition. I'm wondering what that might look like in Bothell.
We got that comment just this afternoon ourselves, and so haven't done the analysis of exactly what that would look like in Bothell. I do know that sort of the conventional wisdom has been that fixed transit, which traditionally has been light rail transit, typically can draw within a half mile, whereas bus transit more typically draws from a quarter-mile radius. Of course, those are not fixed, and bus riders can walk just as far as rail riders for the most part. But those have been kind of some standards that have been used pretty typically, and I believe that that's why the state legislature went with the quarter-mile radius, because they wanted it to apply to not just fixed transit, but for bus transit as well. Now, in Bothell, we now have one bus rapid transit line, the Swift line, and we're in the planning stages for a second one, the 522 BRT, actually, and then the 405 BRT from Sound Transit. BRT is kind of in between the regular bus service and fixed, and sometimes in some circles is given the same half-mile radius as rail transit. So our approach here has been to meet the state requirement and and the way we've written it is that with proper documentation, we can get to the lower of the state requirements for the parking. But we started with the state mandated quarter mile and haven't really analyzed a larger radius than that.
Well, this is Mike Cotterman. I'd like to add on to what Dave just said. And I may have talked to the commission about this before, but I'll just quickly reiterate the quarter mile and a half mile are really proxies. They represent an approximate 5-minute walk for the quarter mile and an approximate 10-minute walk for the half mile. The actual walk distance varies depending on the condition of the environment that you're walking through, the sidewalks, the availability of sidewalks, traffic crossings, those types of things. So what we do as a shorthand is we use the quarter mile and a half mile radius. And that works fine for planning purposes and what we're talking about here. The other thing I would point out is, as Dave mentioned, the bus rapid transit, or BRT, for regional purposes now, we are using that half mile for BRT. So we consider that a high capacity transit, just like light rail, even though it doesn't have quite the same attraction as the light rail system. So we have looked at those, and I think what you saw on the map that Dave showed a little bit ago that covers most of the downtown and most of Canyon Park would be covered by the bus rapid transit lines once those go through the downtown. Right now, they just go through Canyon Park. I think this is something that we could revisit in the future as that service increases. I do have a little bit of a concern about going beyond the quarter mile for what the state is defining as frequent transit service, which is every 30 minutes, because typically that doesn't have quite the same draw as more frequent transit service.
Thank you.
And if I could just add a little bit to that also, there's 3 different definitions in the state law for frequent transit service. For low-income housing, it's every 30 minutes or twice an hour for a continuous 12 hours per day. For the senior housing, it's 4 times an hour for at least a continuous 12 hours a day. And then for market rate housing, it is 4 stops of a single line per hour for 12 hours a day. So that's just one other thing that makes it hard to actually map it out and makes it easier to have this done on a case-by-case basis, depending on the situation.
Commissioner Vliet.
Yes, thank you, Dave, for that presentation. And I applaud the city, too, for trying to get this addressed so that Imagine Housing can provide what appears to be a great project for seniors and low-income seniors. I had a question with regards to you just touched on it. I was kind of surprised it was just so coincidental, but on the draft findings, they're on page 7, part C. It says, you just touched on it. So for very low income and extremely low income, it says transit stop that receives transit service at least 2 times per hour. And then for seniors, it was 4 times. And then for market rate, it was 4 times. I'm curious as to why that is. Why is it that it's just two times per hour for the low and extremely low? I'm trying to better understand that.
There have been a number of things about the state legislation that we've been scratching our heads over as well. The rationale and even folks at Commerce who were charged with putting together a paper explaining these had some difficulty. The rationale they had was for the affordable housing that that the lower level of service was going to be basically that would increase the areas where affordable housing that would qualify for the reduction for affordable housing. And the highest standard that he set was for the market rate housing. So that's a smaller area where they're incentivizing market rate housing close to frequent transit. So that's the rationale that we've been given.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. It doesn't make sense to me at all. And I'll be bringing that up later under discussion. And then I had one other question also on page 7, just to better understand. Oh, within the same red underlining documentation. And it says account parking demand and availability of on-street parking within 800 feet of the project. So do you have any idea where they came up with that number, the 800 feet?
Well, that's drawn from our own code, which says that residential projects can locate part of their required parking offsite within an 800-foot radius. And it's also a fairly common radius to use for parking, on-street parking availability studies related to projects. I know the city of Seattle uses that standard. So that's where that came from.
And lastly, just on that, thank you very much for answering those. And this may get too granular, but I think it's a good question to ask. So when parking studies are done, how do they, if there's a parking space on the street, do they use some kind of algorithm to decide how often there's a car in that particular spot and for how long and on what days? Or do they actually do an actual study where somebody studies that area around how does that work? It just seems like, I don't know, just wanting to ensure that cars aren't parked in, I guess, on-street parking, just kind of continuously for days on end.
The typical methodology for those studies is they do parking counts at certain times of the day. They try to pick a time of day where they'll expect the highest demand for on-street parking, and or at least a couple of times a day that would have a high demand. And then the analysis is based on the percentage of spaces utilized or the percentage of spaces available. So if, for example, in that 800-foot radius during those peak hours, 85% or more of the parking spaces are taken, then there would be very little available to support a new development. Whereas if the utilization was at 35%, then they would deem that there would be sufficient parking to at least supplement, if not completely serve, a new development.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Olson.
This is Amanda Olson. Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button for a second there. So the 800 feet is just kind of puzzling me a little bit, because we're saying that, within a quarter-mile walking distance is fine for buses. So why wouldn't we say a quarter mile for people to walk from their cars? That's the only thing that's kind of funny to me about it. I was just wondering, can that be changed, or is it part of a different part of city code that we're not modifying?
It could be changed. Like I said, we just base that on the radius that we currently allow for off-site parking. I think the thinking is that people will typically walk a little bit farther to get to a transit stop, whether a bus stop or a fixed transit. they'll be more reluctant to walk that kind of a distance from where they park their car to their home. So they're going to want to park within a couple of blocks of their home if they're having to park on the street if they don't have on-site parking.
Thank you.
Mike Cotterman, just to add on to what Dave said, the other thing I think is a couple things. One is walking to and from your car, people are often carrying more than they would using transit. And also, the bigger we make that radius, going beyond 800 feet, the more opportunity or potential there is for overlap among different users of that parking space. So if we have several different developments that are doing a parking utilization study that are within a quarter mile, there could be some double counting going on of the availability of spaces. So we want to try to keep that in a fairly compact area as well.
Commissioner Alders.
Thank you. Commissioner Alders here. And thank you to my fellow commissioners for asking about this 800 feet requirement or suggestion. My question is, can you point to me an example in downtown Bothell, perhaps, where this 800-foot rule is already enacted and working for people? Just to help me like picture, what are we like? What does it actually look like?
The only development that I am aware of that has officially utilized off-site parking to meet their parking requirement is the First Street Flats project by Kerry Westerbeck, the commenter of Exhibit 1. He was short a space or two on his development, or maybe he was going to be short a space or two on the overall development, and he's leasing 2 parking spaces from the Boulevard Place project, which is right next door. So that's well within the 800 feet. I'm not aware of any other projects that have actually utilized that provision, but we're starting to get some more inquiries about that and what the opportunities might be within that radius for different sites. And the reason that Boulevard Place had parking spaces available when they first started their application process, they indicated that our current parking requirement for specialized senior housing, which is 2/3 of a space per unit, was more than they needed in their typical project. They said that the demand is usually 0.5 spaces per unit. But they agreed to meet the 2/3 of a space per unit and therefore felt they had some surplus to offer to other developers nearby.
This is Mike Cotterman. I just did a quick measurement of some downtown blocks. The distance from Bothell Way to 102nd along Main Street is 875 feet. If that gives you an idea of what kind of a walking distance we're talking about.
Other commissioners, questions, comments to the presentation? Keeping in mind we'll deliberate after the public hearing. Hearing none, I think we can open the public hearing, correct? Okay, let's open the public hearing. Are there any comments to be made?
I did not receive any requests today for anyone to speak, and the only other speaker we have not identified is Bothell Virtual Meeting Host 5. So if you could identify yourself I'll unmute your mic.
This is Steve Morikawa. I'm just listening in case you guys had any questions on the previous topic.
Okay. Steve's just here to keep us honest. Thank you.
So with that, I do not believe we have any additional public comments at this time. We have the two that were submitted in writing prior to the meeting that everyone's had the opportunity to take a look at. So I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Olson. Oh, she's muted. There you go.
This is going to sound silly, but I keep losing my mouse. So this is Amanda Olson, and I move that we close the public hearing.
Commissioner Vliet.
Commissioner Dave Vliet, I second that motion.
Well, the motion being made and seconded to close the public hearing on the limited parking height reduction and this height allowance here. I know you renamed it, but that's what I see in front of me. All in favor of closing the hearing? I see all the commissioners in favor. So with that, we will close the hearing and begin discussion on the matter. And I guess we'll open discussion. I would like to focus on attachment 1, and that has findings, conclusions, and recommendations, and then Exhibit A has the code amendments. I'd like to look at the code amendments first in case our review of the code amendments results in a change in the findings or recommendations, if there are no objections. That work for everyone? So, Dave, can you bring up the Exhibit A? Get that up then. Oh, sorry. Commissioner Gustafson, were you trying to speak? I'm sorry, I was looking to the side.
Oh, Sarah Gustafson here, already taken care of. I was wondering if we could just see the page so we were all on the same page, but it's already there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that'll be easier. Focusing, of course, on the changes, but if there are comments to the existing language, we can certainly discuss that as well. So, first page adds designation S with the height change. Any questions or comments to that section?
Dave, could you enlarge that just a little bit? Some of us don't have as young of eyes as we used to.
Okay, Commissioner Vliet.
Thank you.
I'm in favor of that height limit change with regard to incentivize affordable housing.
And I'm going to ask the commissioner's indulgence with the screen this way. I don't have you all up in front of me, so I can't see both the page and all of you. So if I'm skipping over you, I'll do my best to get to you. Okay, so I guess we'll continue down to the next page. I don't see any changes on this page.
That's
Maximum height, okay.
That's just where the note S is inserted in the table.
Yes.
So the same thing. I kept much of this language in there for context, but at the bottom of page 4 is where the next substantive change is. It's a footnote to the parking table that just references the code sections that explain those parking reductions.
So it's adding transit and the 2C and E.
So we'll get to those later. The reason that the downtown plan previously only had the green building reduction, which is in the same section of code, is that the downtown parking requirements basically factored in the previously existing transit reductions in the required parking. So these are opportunities to go beyond that. And as I said before, most of the downtown sub-area has parking requirements that meet the upper limit of the new state requirements. And this will give applicants an opportunity to justify going beyond that.
So,
I'm gonna.
seeing no comments, let's move to page 5. I suspect there might be some.
The top change is mostly structural semantic change. And then here in subsection B, I'm sorry, B4C is where we get into the requirements for the minimum requirements for the affordable housing. Actually, in B4C are some changes that we had to make to our existing definitions for affordable housing to meet the new state definitions. So these are just changes to make those comply with the new state definitions.
Hey, Dave, I'm going to ask you to pause. Commissioner Gustafson has a question or comment.
Sarah Gustafson here. Thanks for noticing my post-it. I understand that the owner-occupied versus renter-occupied distinctions here come from the state. I'm wondering, for our own education, why is there a difference? What are they trying to incentivize or create? Thank you.
Well, actually, this section 4C has to do with the affordable housing overlay that we implemented,
Okay.
and where we made a distinction between owner-occupied housing at 80% of area median income and rental housing at 60%. And with the new definitions for our new incentives, we had to tweak the way that we described those two areas. So basically, the changes in 4C are just to keep the status quo for the overlay section. The substantive changes are below in 5. 5 is a whole new section that deals with the affordable housing incentive. And there we're not making any distinctions between ownership and rental housing.
Okay.
So any further questions or comments on 4 before we move to the new section 5? Jumping back and forth. Commissioner Alders.
Thank you. So just so that I can understand the language, sorry, this is Commissioner Aldrich here. So I can understand the language that is here. Can an owner in an owner-occupied building create housing that is affordable to low-income households? Are they limited from doing that? Is there any incentive to do that?
So these definitions are really intended for condominiumized multifamily housing projects, so townhomes or condominiumized apartment buildings where the units are sold rather than rented. And the rationale here was, and Mike Stenger, you can jump in and help me if it was that and these are requirements for essentially for private development as they applied within this overlay that set a percentage of units, and then some requirements for both owner-occupied housing, which targeted a slightly higher income level, and renter-occupied housing, which target a slightly lower level. Initially, we defined those 80% for owner-occupied and 60% for rental, both as moderate income households. But the new definitions required us to separate those out. I'm not sure that answered your question.
This
it does.
Mike Cotterman, if I could add on a little bit to that. Excuse me. These requirements are imposed at the time the units are created. So, so that's if we know at the time whether it's going to be an owner-occupied or condominium, as Dave was saying, or if it's multifamily apartments, it'll be rented out. When those units are created, and typically they identify at the beginning of the process because they're going after typically some sort of funding or some incentive program as well. So it isn't usually a situation where there's a conversion of an existing building into an affordable. It can happen, but typically it's new construction at the time the units are created. Does that help at all?
Yes, this is Commissioner Aldrich. Both of those answers do help. I was misunderstanding, and so I have been corrected, and now I am clear what it means to be owner occupied. Would that also then include something like a duplex or a fourplex?
It could if there was a project that met the threshold that that had a number of duplexes or fourplexes, say a townhome development like Dawson Square or the Landing. But the threshold for having to comply with these is a minimum of 5 units, a development with a minimum of 5 units. So a single duplex or a single fourplex would be below that threshold.
However, we did make an amendment, and Dave helped me remember exactly what we did. It was a couple of years ago now. There was an amendment that allowed for duplexes in some areas, but there's a requirement that at least one of the units in the duplex is affordable. Am I remembering that correctly?
We proposed in a application for a rezone from single family or residential 9600 to R 7200 to a smaller lot single family zone that again, if they met the threshold of subdivision of at least 5 units, that they could meet their affordable housing requirement we would allow them to build a duplex on what would otherwise be a single family parcel and use that towards their affordable housing requirement. That one didn't actually make it over the finish line, but we did put language in the sort of foundational code that would allow that for future single family upzones.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so other questions or comments on section 4 before we move on to 5? Seeing none. All right, Dave, you want to go to section 5 here?
Yeah, there we go.
So, commissioners. And that's the entire section you're seeing there. Anyone have a question or comment? Seeing none. Move forward.
So this minor change, and now we've moved into a different section of the code. This is the 1216.110, the transit, rideshare, and green building provisions. So this is where the existing transit reductions apply. And since we're adding now some transit reductions that could apply in the downtown sub-area, we're making a distinction between this existing reduction that doesn't apply downtown to the others. So that's what that change is about. And again, the meat of it here is in these all new subsections C, D, and E, which apply to the 3 different classes that the state law is now requiring us to limit our parking minimums.
Commissioner Vliet.
Yes, I guess I thank you, Chair. I alluded to this a little while ago. I would be in favor potentially of, this is a good time to bring this up, but of making that part C say at least 4 times per hour, just like the other 2, because I don't feel like I think it's a head scratcher to me. I think it should be the same for all 3 of those.
My concern would be that for whatever reason, the legislature did decide to allow this reduction in to apply more broadly than 4 per hour. There'd be a larger area that would qualify for this at 2 per hour. So increasing it to 4 per hour would not comply with the state requirement. We can go beyond what the state requires. We could expand it to a half mile, as Alan Dotterman suggested, or we could go to lower parking levels than what the state put. But we can't do less than what the state is requiring.
Commissioner Alders.
Thank you. Commissioner Aldrich here. If I am understanding you correctly, Dave, the 2 times per hour is actually more generous and will allow a larger area where low-income housing can be built, because there are going to be more places that have transit 2 times per hour than there are places that have 4 times per hour. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's right. So won't necessarily increase the area where low-income housing can be built, but it will increase the area where they can apply for these parking reductions.
Okay. Others on this section? Commissioner Curd, and then Commissioner Gustafson.
Thanks. This is Karsten Kurd. I'm wondering if we want consistency, we could say 2 times per hour on both the seniors and people with disabilities in item D, and for market rate multifamily in E, or kind of in accordance with the Exhibit 2 that we received from Imagine Housing, we may include projects located within a half mile of a transit stop, such that they are also subject to applying for this exception with a parking study. I guess the proof would be in the pudding of the parking study. So I don't see why we can't make our code kind of consistent with other jurisdictions that are going through the same process, especially because in the downtown area, we have sidewalks and infrastructure in place for people to walk to and from the bus stops. I'd be interested to hear what other commissioners think about this.
Any Other commissioners wish to comment on Commissioner Kurd's thoughts? Commissioner Olson.
This is Amanda Olson. I agree with Commissioner Kurd's thoughts. Since there is a parking study that's required, I think it makes sense to have D and E match C, and then see how it goes with the study. So I do agree with that. Thank you.
Commissioner Gustafson, and then Commissioner Vliet.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah Gustafson here. I echo Commissioner Kurd's comments for the reasons that Commissioner Alders explained. I think she explained it very well and very clearly. I actually have a pretty granular question about the drafting here, where it says that minimum parking requirements to be reduced to at least one parking space per bedroom or 3/4 of a space per unit. And to me, 3/4 of a space per unit sounds like a much less rigorous standard than one parking space per bedroom. It seems that they are not comparable. It seems like it would be a lot easier to meet 0.75 space per unit. And I'm wondering, am I missing something here? Are we going to let applicants use the 0.75 space per unit if that's what we wish, if that's what they wish? Something doesn't seem to fit, and I'm wondering how would it work when a person is actually using these standards and deciding between these standards. Thank you.
This was an attempt to address what seems like a contradiction in the state requirement, the one space per bedroom or 0.75 spaces per unit. It seems like it should be that should be flipped, but that is what the requirement is. And as I said, in downtown, we meet the one space per bedroom. In fact, we in some areas we exceed that. We require one space per bedroom, and then 1.5 for 2 bedrooms and 2.2 for 3 bedrooms and above in the downtown core, downtown neighborhood, and downtown transition districts. In the SR 522 districts, the requirement is 1 space per bedroom up to a maximum of 2.2 per unit. The rationale that I had for wording it this way was that to allow these parking reductions for these types of housing in downtown, if they can to the lower level, to the 0.75 space per unit, if they can justify it through their parking study. And the parking study would look at the specific type of development and what those kinds of developments, what the parking utilization is, or the parking demand is in the region, and then also look at the external factors, the availability of on-street parking, and then determine how many spaces they actually need. I'd like to go back to the idea of consistency for these 3 different categories. I think there is a logic, maybe a more solid rationale for the differences in level of service. I'm not sure about the difference between low income and senior, other than seniors and people with disability could argue that they need a higher level of transit service, better transit service than low income who may be perfectly able to walk the further distance or to manage with a different level of a lower level of service. If you make this is all consistent with market rate housing, though, then you're basically giving market rate housing the same incentive that you are for these other affordable housing types. So I would consider that if you're trying to achieve consistency.
So I had previously recognized Commissioner Vliet. After that, I'd like to do a little check-in if we have want to take a break and discuss after that, or whether we're getting close to wrapping. So Commissioner Vliet.
Yes, thank you, Dave, and thank you, Commissioner Kurd, for approaching that and looking at that level of consistency. I, however, am more comfortable what staff has brought with us to us today. If we're not going to change that Part C to 4 times per hour, I would agree with what Dave Boyd also said about market rate. I think we just need to show if we're, I mean, we can want something, but I think we need to be able to have transit available if we're going to be kind of pushing these type of projects. And so I would also be in favor of keeping it at a 1/4 mile rather than a 1/2 mile. Thank you.
Okay, so thoughts. Shall we take a 5-minute break, or are we getting close here? Back and forth. I see a little break. Yes. Break. No, I'm not. I'm having trouble reading the room this way.
Here, let me stop sharing for a second. There.
So, if you're interested in taking a 5-minute break, how about a hand? 1. All right, I guess we power through. So, yep, that's 2. Well, I'll go for the break too. So, why don't we take a 5-minute break? We'll come back and try to move along more quickly.
Commissioner, Chair.
Yes.
So my hand, Commissioner Aldrich, was to indicate that I don't feel like I need personally a break at this point, but in about 15 minutes from now, I think that would be fantastic if we were to continue with this portion and then take a break. Does that, like, that's where I'm at. Where's everybody else?
All right, let's give it about 15 more minutes and we'll gauge the room again then. So, Dave, if you want to put back up on the screen.
Okay.
So, there are other comments on this section. I heard some interest early on in change and then kind of circling back around to some acceptance of the language here. Commissioner Gustafson. And then Commissioner Olson.
Sarah Gustafson here. I think if I were to recommend a motion, I know we're not there yet, I would recommend that the low income and the market rate housing units be increased to 1/2 mile for the reasons previously discussed. However, I have found the arguments for keeping the senior housing at 1/4 mile very compelling, and that would be, at least at this point, my vote. Thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Olson, did you wish to speak to this?
Well, I do agree with what Commissioner Gustafson said, and I guess I'm just wondering, is it worth sort of taking a quick show of hands how people are leaning so we can kind of decide on this part? Are we allowed to like sort of pre-vote?
No, I think we need to wait for a motion to be put forward to weigh in, and then there would be discussion on the motion. Keeping with Robert's rules here.
I think the purpose of the discussion, the deliberation that you're having right now, is for each commissioner to indicate where they are on some of the issues. So rather than any kind of a straw vote, that's the purpose of this discussion. And as the chair said, anyone can make a motion at any time, and then once there's a motion on the floor, then the discussion will be focused specifically on that motion.
So we could certainly entertain a motion if there's an interest in someone putting a motion forth. Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair Kiernan. This is my first official motion, so please help
Congratulations.
me, thanks, clarify anything that needs to be clarified. I move to amend.
Could you pause for a minute? We lost the
Sure.
lights in the room, and I wouldn't be able to write down what you're saying. Not sure what the interval is, but the timer goes off and I lose light. Okay, thank you. Proceed, please.
Thank you, Chair. I move to amend Section C from mentioning located within a quarter mile of a transit stop to located within a half a mile of a transit stop. I also move to modify Section E to change within 1/4 of a mile of a transit stop to 1/2 of a mile of a transit stop. Thank you.
Okay, is there a second to that motion? Commissioner Alderks.
Commissioner Aldrich's here. I second Commissioner Gustafson's motion to change the wording to a quarter or a half mile in each of those sections C and E.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Discussion on that motion. Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, Chair. This is Karsten Kurd. I'm generally in favor of this. I understand the impacts of increasing the distance to a half mile in the seniors and people with disabilities section. I think that my point comes from having our code be flexible, and flexibility doesn't necessarily mean opening the floodgates. There's a parking study that has to be done. I've reviewed some of the historical parking studies that are on file with the city of Bothell. They appear to be pretty comprehensive. I still am not really sure how much these companies charge for such a study, but I anticipate that it's probably equivalent to other specialty consultant studies for the development process. And I think that there's sufficient protection for the city to safeguard existing parking through the use of these parking studies. So that's why I'm generally in favor.
Thank you, Commissioner Curd. Scanning back and forth for any other commissioners who would like to speak on the motion. All right, seeing none. Okay, seeing none, we'll have a vote on the motion. And to make it easier for me, I'm going to call the commissioners, so I don't have to jump back and forth, and you jump around on this ribbon too, so I'll like count. So I'll ask you to just say aye or nay when I call your name. Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Peastrup?
Aye.
Commissioner Curd?
Aye.
Commissioner Vliet?
Nay.
Commissioner Alderks?
Aye.
Commissioner Gustafson?
Aye.
And chair votes aye, so the motion carries 6-1. Have that, staff? There was a nay, Commissioner. That was a nay, correct, Commissioner Vliet? Yes. So there was one.
Yes.
So any further discussion on this section after changes pursuant to the motion?
So I just want to make sure I captured that correctly. So that was to change in items C and E. That's Charlie and
Edgar.
Edgar. I don't know what E is in the from 1/4 mile to 1/2 mile. We leave the 1/4 mile for D, is that correct? Okay.
Motion as proposed.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so any further discussion on this section, or shall we move forward? Okay, Dave, you want to move us forward? Renumbering, I don't think.
Yeah. Okay. So here we're actually jumping to the definitions in the affordable housing section of the code, and the changes that I referenced earlier that were necessitated by to meet the state definitions, or at least to more closely meet the state definitions, and without creating a total rewrite of what we have to date. So now, rather than having different percentage of area median income applied to a single definition, each definition is just tied to a percent. It's not tied to rental or ownership, and then we'll make that distinction in the, or we've already discussed making that distinction in the section of the code that references that. And again, the only part of the new code that we're adding that we address this is the parking exceptions for very low and extremely low income housing.
This is Mike Cotterman. Dave, just to confirm, those are the definitions that are in the state legislation. Is that correct?
Yes.
So questions or comments to this portion? Seeing none, let's roll down. Reference to the corridor.
Okay. Again, we're still in Chapter 1207. We are adding a reference to these voluntary affordable housing incentives that for now are in this SR 522 corridor outside the affordable housing overlay. And below that, the threshold for compliance, again, this applies to developments of 5 or more dwelling units. And these voluntary incentives are for projects that that make all of their dwelling units affordable.
So questions or comments? Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. Dave Boyd, I'm wondering if you might summarize for us what is in BMC 1207-050. I didn't actually look it up, and I'm wondering, is it a fee in lieu that could be used for affordable housing if developers do not provide that on site themselves?
Let's see if I included it. I didn't. Bear with me for a minute. I will look that up. Mike Stanger, if you remember by any chance. Yes, 1250 has to do with our alternative compliance, which can be building required affordable housing offsite or a fee in lieu. Those don't really, I don't see a way that these would apply to this, to these voluntary incentives, since all of the units have to be affordable.
Thank you.
Oops. Sorry. Oh. There we go. Yeah, the reason that that's there is we needed to add this section to distinguish between the affordable housing overlay with the requirement for a percentage where alternative compliance could come into play, and the voluntary incentives where they don't.
Thank you.
Commissioner Vliet, did I see you seeking to comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Dave, on part 2 here, says that all developments using voluntary incentives shall make all the dwelling units within the development affordable. So just so I'm curious, and I've been a huge advocate for affordable housing my whole time that I've been on the Planning Commission, and I'm glad that the city is kind of is finally delving into it over the last few years. But is there a reason, is that just kind of a typical language there? I just wouldn't want to rule out anything where there's maybe, or there's some potential developments that have a little, a few market rate units and then a majority, I guess, affordable. Maybe, I don't know if that's a question for Dave or for Arch.
We struggled a little bit with this one, trying to come up with a percentage that might work for a private developer that wanted to get an extra floor of development and could make it pencil out by having a percentage of the units affordable. And based on feedback I got from both Imagine Housing and from Mike Stanger at Arch, the conclusion was that that just wasn't going to happen. So we might as well just accept that these are going to be affordable, nonprofit affordable housing developers that will be doing all affordable units. And Mike, if you have anything more to add to that, feel free to jump in.
Well, thank you for that comment, Dave. Good clarification.
Mike, did you speak? Nope.
David said.
Okay. All right. So any further questions or comments on this section? Seeing none.
And let me see. Again, these changes were just to make that distinction between the developments that would happen within the overlay with a mix of affordable and market rate units, and the voluntary incentives. So these really don't, they apply to the previously approved affordable housing overlay with required affordable housing.
Yeah, I think we're finished this. So any other questions or comments on this section of the code? And then I'll suggest we take a brief break before going over the findings, conclusions, and recommendations. And Commissioner Alders.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Alders here. And I guess my question relates a little bit to the idea of what is moderate income. But also what you're saying here is if you're going to have like a mixed use, can you keep it on the mixed use?
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. Almost there. Down, I think one more page. There we go. Okay, so specifically, for example, if there was going to be a Habitat for Humanity house that was built in an existing neighborhood, that would be considered owner because that would be like an owner. Oh, I can't remember the term now. I'm sorry, but the people living there would be owners of it instead of rental, and they would be in a neighborhood with market rate, and it would be extremely low or low income. Is the code making room for those kinds of projects to be happening here in Bothell?
Yes, if Habitat for Humanity or another affordable housing provider wanted to do a single house within a development, there's nothing in the code that prevents that. This code really would only come into play in a situation where, for example, in a single family development, the example you provided, if we upzoned a single family zone to a higher intensity single family zone, applied an affordable housing requirement that would apply to any development of 5 units or more, and a developer came in and wanted to do 5 or 10 units and had to do a percentage of those as affordable. That's where the provisions in this code come into play. So there's nothing in here that would prevent an affordable housing developer that wanted to do something below the threshold from doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer.
Any other questions or comments on the code revisions here before we take up? Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your patience. I would like us to take a few more moments to reflect on Commissioner Aldrich's question. I understand that we are not preventing a Habitat for Humanity-like development here, but I do think the question is, are we making room? I think that's very well put, because if we allow owner-occupied to only meet the moderate threshold, you will get potentially more developments that only meet the moderate threshold. To me, it does seem slightly strange to make distinctions between owner-occupied and renter-occupied. I do understand that we are trying to get a mix of economic levels here, and that townhomes are important, and that it does make more sense for them to be geared at moderate income. However, I feel like there's a little more debate that I would like to see happen on this question. Thank you.
I'm jumping around on the ribbon here to see if anyone's seeking to be recognized. Saw Mike Stenger. Oh, here we go. Now, change the view.
Thank you.
Mike, excuse me for interrupting. Before we, because I was going to ask Mike to respond to that, but I was going to suggest we take the break first, because I could see this becoming a bigger discussion. So before we start into that discussion, I was wondering if we wanted to go ahead and take the break.
We did overrun the 15 minutes that we talked about earlier. So suggest 5-minute break. We come back and pick up at that point. All right. Thank you. See you all in 5. We are back on the air. We have one commissioner who hasn't returned yet. Oh, here we go. We are all back. So if we can continue, and I think Director Cutterman had a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to ask Commissioner Gustafson, you had posed the question about owner-occupied housing and what we're doing to, I forget the words you used exactly, but I think to create more of an environment for that to occur, if I understood where you're going with that. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the question? Before I ask Mike Stanger to answer, I want to make sure that we're understanding the question and I'm not clear exactly what the issue is that you're asking us to address at this point.
Certainly, thank you for asking for clarification. Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Michael. I think my question is that we are setting aside let me think. We are setting incentives and restrictions for renter occupied affordable housing. And it seems to make sense to me. And we're trying to go for the really, really deep affordability with the renter occupied housing. And to me, it seems like there's an argument for making the same bold push for doing that in owner occupied housing as well. I think there are opportunities for that. For example, Habitat for Humanity or other types of housing that would bring a lot of economic diversity to the area. And I'm afraid that if we settle for moderate levels with owner-occupied housing, we might crowd the space with that kind of housing while missing opportunities for very affordable owner-occupied housing. I don't know if this would be the case. I think it's wonderful that we have Mike Stanger here to help us understand if that would be the case, but I do want to make sure that question gets asked and some information gets provided. Thank you.
No, it's a good question. Thank you. And just to sort of to restate that, just to make sure that I'm hearing that, because Mike is the expert on this, and I'm very glad that he's here to help us answer these questions. So I'm actually hearing a couple of questions in what you're posing there. I think one has to do with what can we do to encourage deeper affordability in owner-occupied housing? And if we don't do that, would we be limiting the ability of organizations like Habitat to do more of that if we're filling up with more of the moderate owner-occupied housing? Am I getting those two questions, framing those correctly? Okay, good. Thank you. So now I'll ask Mike if he would respond to those. Thank you.
Dave, if you don't, Mike Stanger here. Dave, if you don't mind, I'll just hijack the comment you were going to make to start with, which is that just as a point of information, the code amendments that are proposed here are not introducing that distinction between affordability levels between owner-occupied and renter-occupied. Those were already in the code, adopted as part of upzones done a year or so ago. But now, but I still appreciate your question, and I would say that the city is not settling for moderate income affordability on owner-occupied housing. It really goes more toward the distinction I was making earlier about affordable housing programs that are on the land use or tax incentive side of things versus those that are created through public subsidy, or in Arch's case, through the trust fund that's part of the Arch partnership of cities. and the trust fund has supported Habitat for Humanity projects and some other low-cost owner-occupied housing home ownership projects in the past. And when you're talking about 50% of median or below, that typically does take public subsidy. The city Bothell has been increasing their contributions to the trust fund and are making strong steps in that direction already. It is possible to do low-income home ownership without subsidies or without the trust fund. For example, in Redmond, they have mandatory affordable housing, which typically requires 10% of the units affordable at 80% of median, and that applies in their single-family areas as well as multifamily. But there's an option in there that the developer can choose to substitute one unit at 50% of median for two at 80%. And I'm sorry for diverting from the agenda subject here, but I thought it might be worth just a minute to go into. Some developers do take that option, and so there are homes available in Redmond that are priced at 50% of median. They don't sell as well, or they don't sell as easily, I should say. They do get sold, but it's hard for people to qualify for loans when your income is that low. And so that's one reason why home ownership programs through incentives don't usually try to reach that low. And another one, as Dave mentioned earlier, was that incentive programs are always a balancing between the benefit that the city is giving, or the value that the city is giving the developer in the incentives, and the benefit that the city is trying to get back in affordable housing. And so that balance usually finds itself, often are in that 80% of median area. I'm also hearing, along with your more specific questions and previous ones from other commissioners, that you might really like to have a deeper dive into affordable housing programs. And so I just thought I would offer to or let you know that I'm also available for that at an appropriate time in the future, maybe when the Canyon Park code amendments come back to you or something like that. I'll work with Mr. Cotterman on that. Does that help?
Did I see interest in speaking, Commissioner Gustafson?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Singer. I think that your comments do highlight that perhaps the deep affordability and the owner-occupied might be straining the market too much to the point where it would not be feasible. Would love to keep hearing more. And I think that does answer my question. Thank you.
Okay, so commissioners, other questions, comments, discussion on the code amendment? Seeing none, I would propose we move into the draft findings, conclusions, and recommendations. So, Dave, can you pull that up? Okay, here we go. So the end, we will take a vote on adopting this document. So the first section of the findings, I believe they're pretty standard. Any questions regarding the findings in the document? Jump with the ribbon. Seeing Director Cotterman.
If I could ask Dave, just to clarify something, I'm looking at the numbering on these. Am I missing a page? I am missing a page. Never mind. I got it.
Yeah, we're consistent.
So I think I think the main focus, most of it is pro forma. I think the main thing that we're looking at for looking for direction from the Planning Commission. Excuse me.
Specific findings.
Yes, and
Okay,
the specific Planning Commission findings, starting on page 3, bottom of page 3, going through the conclusions and recommendations on page 4.
So that starts at number 16. Numbers 1 through 15 are, as indicated, pretty boilerplate. They refer back to other documents that we wouldn't be changing, and there is one about exhibits which will be revised to reflect what actually happened. So these are the findings that we are going to be voting on approving. Looking at number 16 there, providing additional parking reduction exemptions for certain developments near frequent transit service will conform with the new state regulations and promote the city goals to support affordable senior/disabled and transit-oriented housing development. Jumping, not seeing anyone seeking to comment there. Next one, 17, providing a voluntary incentive for affordable housing will facilitate the development of a city surplus parcel and potential future affordable housing projects, promoting city goals, policies, and strategies for affordable and special needs housing. Not seeing anyone commenting there. Okay, seeing nods. Hard to put little heads in the ribbon to catch the nods. So the proposed regulations, we did have one motion on the regulation, which was adopted by the commission and does not impact this finding. So we're amending the specified portions of the code there. As Director Cotterman.
So yes, Chair, thank you. So as you noted, we're not actually changing any language there in the proposed regulations as far as the findings and conclusions. If the commission would like to make any kind of a statement regarding the change that you made to the from changing the quarter mile to the half mile and why you made that change, that's something that we could add to the specific Planning Commission findings. It's not necessary, but if it's information that you want to convey to the City Council, that would be the place to do that.
So that would be an opportunity to get into the record and before the council the reason for that change. So is there an interest in proposing language for an additional finding? I think Commissioner Gustafson. Yes, Commissioner Gustafson.
Commissioner Gustafson here. Yes, I support putting language in, and I think Commissioner Aldrichs and Kurd have said it so well. I wish we could go back and record what they said and put it here. So I'm going to leave it up to them.
We did record it. It is recorded. So if we don't need exact wording from the commission this evening, if you just give us the general language that you want us to include, then staff can draft that and we'll run it by the chair to make sure that we've captured it.
So there's an interest in an additional, inserting a new specific finding 18. Would Commissioner Kurd or Aldrichs like to generally discuss what that finding should state? Commissioner Curd.
Thanks, Chair. This is Karsten Kurd. I will probably butcher the words and I will be really halted, but I'd say we propose further exceptions to we propose further exceptions to the proposed affordable housing parking requirements in subsection 12.0
1216.
Thank you. Specifically, increasing the distance in which these regulations are applied by an additional quarter mile in instances of can you refer back to the exact number? Sorry.
It was section C and section E, which addressed the very low income or extremely low income individuals, which is C, and E is the market rate multifamily. We excluded D, which was the disabilities.
Okay, yep. So I'd include that. And then say our reasoning in general was to further incentivize affordable housing near frequent transit, such that parking studies are still employed to ensure that resources are not overburdened.
Can I?
If there are additions or changes, I would be welcome to those.
So if I could maybe just try to summarize, like I said, I don't think we can wordsmith it tonight exactly. But,
can I take a shot at it?
Sure, go ahead, Dave.
Okay. This is based on what I heard in the discussion. So, these findings are generally high level. They don't usually get into the specifics of code sections necessarily. So I'm going to take a shot at it. So what I would insert between after 16, because that's the one that deals with frequent standard transit service, would be extending the transit service areas to 1/2 mile for affordable and market rate housing will broaden the area where these exceptions apply. Retaining the 1/4 mile service area per state code for senior and disabled housing is appropriate due to those populations' limited mobility.
This is Commissioner Kurd, and I approve of that wording. Thank you so much.
So I saw nodding heads. I'm looking to Director Proudman. Do we need a motion for that?
No, I think you can. Oh boy. Yeah, we probably should, just to be safe, because we are adopting the findings and conclusions as well as the code amendment. So just nicely done, Dave. Appreciate the wording there.
Okay, so I'll ask if there's a motion, and I see Commissioner Alder waving a post-it.
Yes, my replacement. Jenny Aldrich's here. I cannot find my little yellow one, so I have Post-its. I motion to adopt the language proposed by Dave Boyd to add a finding in this section as number 18.
He proposed a new 17 because of the way it flowed.
Proposed it. Okay. Well, I will amend my motion. I motion to amend finding 17 to reflect the language that David Boyd proposed.
So there's a motion on the floor, and I'll summarize and maybe rephrase a little bit to add a new finding 17 pursuant to Senior Planner Boyd's language, and wordsmith a little bit, but capturing the intent there. Is there a second? I think Commissioner Curd was waving. Yes. Curd.
I second the motion. This is Karsten. I second the motion.
Okay, so now you're all in front of me. Don't have to roll call. I'll ask all in favor, kind of indicate by raising your hand. And I see unanimity among the commissioners. So the motion passes that a new finding, shuffle my papers. A new specific planning commission finding 17 be inserted, language Senior Planner Boyd proposed, perhaps wordsmithed a little bit for the page, and that will be adopted. So existing 17 will become 18 and everything else will be renumbered. Is there further discussion on the specific planning commission findings? Seeing no indication from the commissioners. The next section is the proposed regulations, keeping in mind that we did adopt a motion making a change to the regulations, and that does not require a change in this finding. So we would adopt the finding, recognizing that that motion is included. The other two, testimony and exhibits, will be amended to reflect what has occurred. Any discussion there?
So,
yes, Dave.
So yeah, I've actually already added the exhibits to another version. This is the PDF that was in your packet. We didn't receive any public testimony, so that'll remain the same.
But we do have two exhibits that will be referenced, correct?
Yeah, those will be inserted, and then also this was the findings that were prepared for the meeting on the 15th. So finding 7, I'll change the date of the hearing to today.
Yes. Good catch. So the conclusions, rolling down.
The conclusions are pretty pro forma, and then the recommendation just repeats the Planning Commission recommendation.
And again, we don't need to make any changes there based on the amendments to either the code, the draft code, or the findings this evening.
Okay, so we have before us draft Planning Commission findings, conclusions, and recommendations for limited parking reduction and allowance code amendments. We adopted a motion inserting a new finding 17 and then renumbering the remaining ones. So I'll ask if there is a motion to adopt these findings as amended.
Actually, Mr. Chair, if
Yes.
I may, at this point, I believe you could entertain a motion that would adopt, or that would recommend that the council adopt the proposed ordinance and the findings and recommendations as amended.
Okay, so I'll ask if there's a motion, and I see Commissioner Olson.
Hi, this is Amanda Olson, and I move that we recommend the council adopt the proposed findings and the resolution as amended. And I hope I said that right.
Is there a second? Commissioner Curd.
I second the motion.
All in favor of the motion to recommend the council adopt the code amendments and commission findings? All in favor? I see all commissioners are in favor, none opposed. Therefore, we're recommending the council adopt these amendments and the findings as presented.
Actually, the commission's adopting the findings, but we'll
the
work
commission
on the
adopt the
wording.
findings, but recommending the council adopt the
Correct.
amendment. Okay.
Thank you. Good work.
And we got you in time for the grant. So, and also that means we will not be meeting in August, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, jumping back to the agenda, that ends our public hearings. Next item is study session. I do not believe we have anything before us, or study session, correct?
No, we do not.
There. Any old business to report on?
None from staff, no.
None from staff? Any reports from staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of quick items. Last night at City Council, we had two items before the City Council, the Title 22 amendments that have to do with the Landmark Preservation Board and Historic Preservation, the Bothell Register of Historic Landmarks, the procedures and regulations that go along with those. There was a public hearing, and the council adopted the recommendation from the Landmark Board. And as some of the commissioners may recall, this was last year, so not all the commissioners currently were on the commission back then. There was a joint meeting with the Landmark Board to go over those amendments, and the commission had some input to that. Typically, the Landmark Board deals with most things that have to do with the historic preservation. However, it's important to note that one of the significant changes to Title 22 has to do with designation of historic districts. And the provisions in the adopted code require that when an historic district is designated by the council, that there would be design guidelines that go along with that district. They're specific to each district that's created. Those design guidelines would go through the Planning Commission based on a recommendation from the Landmark Board. So you will have a role in the future for any historic districts that are designated in the city. So I just want to make you aware of that. Related to that, Mr. Boyd also had a public hearing last night on Downtown Historic Preservation Code amendments for the downtown area, and that also went very well with the council, and that was adopted by the council as well. So both of those passed the council unanimously, and just wanted to make the council or the commission aware of that, because I know you spent quite a bit of time as the commission on the Downtown Historic Preservation Code amendments as well. So, and as you mentioned, we will not be having a meeting now for August. So on behalf of the staff, we want to thank you for all of your work to date and wish you a very relaxing and enjoyable August. And we will see you back on September 2nd. And as you know, we'll have quite a bit for you to work on when we come back. So we'll be doing a lot of Canyon Park, and we'll also be working on finishing up the work that Dave Boyd's been doing on the downtown public space amendments as well. Thank you.
So the next item is reports from members. I saw Mr. Gustafson indicating some interest in speaking.
Thank you, Sarah Gustafson here. I wanted to clarify when we would discuss the public hearing comments from the community members. Would that be in September 2nd?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we will be getting to those. Staff will be preparing. We'll be addressing the comments that were submitted to date on the draft plan.
Okay.
We come back to you in September, either
Okay.
the second and/or the follow-up meeting. So that the hearing may extend beyond the second, but that's when the commission will be discussing those.
Okay. Thank you so much.
So we did continue that hearing. It is still open. We will be addressing the items that were raised. Any other reports from members? Mr. Alders.
Jenny Alders here. I guess I will take this opportunity to just announce that I have enrolled in I believe it's called a public leadership credential through Harvard University starting in September. So I'm going to do that on my own time. It should not interfere at all with Planning Commission, but I'm really excited and interested in the course content, and I wish I could get started sooner.
Congratulations. That sounds quite exciting.
Thank you.
Any other reports from members before we adjourn for the summer? Hearing none, thank you all for your participation in tonight's meeting, and glad we were able to get through the item that was time sensitive, and look forward to seeing you all in September. With that, I adjourn the meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission at 8:33 on July 22nd, 2020. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.